But if we compare, for example, the Danish work culture and the Swedish work culture, they are very different as well.
When you first came to India, what was your biggest culture shock?
During the lockdown here, I took it as a project to really do a deep dive in Indian cooking. So I did some biryani and some butter chicken and some aloo gobi and whatever. Yeah, so that was fun. We work with culture sensitization workshops where we introduce our colleagues to the different aspects of culture for a particular country, the typical pitfalls, and we have some examples on various expressions, etc. Right? And I think that works very well for us. We are very good in Sweden in giving positive feedback. Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. But to give negative feedback, to be challenging in your feedback is something, in my experience, at least Swedes really struggle with. Because when the workday ends at 4:30 in Sweden, then you go home and then you don't see each other kind of. Whereas here, I mean, it's often sometimes, you get invited. When you fall sick, you always have colleagues coming, visiting, preparing food, etc., etc. So I think that Indian people are very easy to get contact with.
Hi everyone. In this episode, I have Jonas with me. So welcome Jonas to this session. Maybe you can start with a short introduction about yourself. Go ahead.
Sure, I can. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Jonas Olsson and I hail from Gothenburg in Sweden. And I've been living in India now for the past 16 years in Bangalore. Yeah, 16 years, so quite a long time. And I work with Volvo Cars, where I head our digital tech hub here in Bangalore. So, and I've been with Volvo Group for almost 25 years, and 15 out of those based here in Bangalore. So it's been an exciting journey so far.
I also know that you are the founder and choir director of the Bangalore Men.
Yeah, that's true. So from childhood, I've been doing music a lot. I come from a very musical family. And prior to doing my master's in computer science, I actually studied at the conservatory in Gothenburg. So I studied classical singing and I studied music theory, music history, etc. So music has been a very big part of my life. And it was important for me to keep that going also here in India. So when I moved here, I joined a couple of choirs and I sang. But then in 2015, I decided to actually launch a choir of my own. And I started off with 7 guys who were all known to me. And we had the same passion for singing. And we started off a male voices choir. And now then 6 years later, the male choir is 22 guys. And I also have an all-female choir, Capella Bangalore, with 24 members. So all in all, 46 people that I meet for rehearsals once a week. So yeah, very exciting.
Great. So when you first came to India, what was your biggest culture shock?
I don't know if it was so much of a culture shock, to be honest, but if I should say what I found most annoying, perhaps, it was a very flexible attitude towards time. Indian stretchable time. And I still find that one of the most challenging aspects with India, that respect for time, both one's own time and others' time, I think is something that is very different to me as a Swede, at least, since being on time and punctuality is something that is very much ingrained in our culture, that you don't waste time.
Exactly.
So that was a bit of a challenge, but I don't think that I was so much culturally shocked, to be honest. And I think that for everyone planning to stay in India, whether it's for a short or longer period in time, I think some reading up is good to do. And I also think it's important to everywhere you go to embrace the culture of the country and actually understand that we are the visitors here, and it's up to us also to adapt and to embrace, so to say, right? With that, I find that India is a very easy country to live in as a foreigner.
Okay, great. How about the spicy food? Some of my expat friends say, I tried spicy food in Germany, but when I come to India, the other one was not that much spicy. Now it's too spicy.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think also the great thing about India is that you have a lot of variety in food, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have the more creamy food of the north, which can be spicy in itself, and then you have the much more kind of raw spice like rasam and stuff here in the south. But then you also have, the Bengali food, which I find much milder and more like European in palate. So I think that yes, food is spicy, but I also think that the range of food really means that if you're not a fan of spicy food, it's not really an issue, because there is always something to choose from. If you want a kofta or whatever, right? I mean, there is always a choice you have, right? And I enjoy Indian food a lot, and I don't mind spicy food. And I mean, I also have taken to cooking some Indian food myself. I mean, during the lockdown here, I took it as a project to really do a deep dive in Indian cooking. So I did some biryani and some butter chicken and some aloo gobi and whatever. Yeah, so that was fun.
Very interesting. There are a few unique Swedish values. One of the value is Lagom. Could you explain what is a Lagom?
Yeah, but Lagom is basically, it's not too much, it's not too little, it's just Lagom, it's in the middle, kind of, that, and I think that kind of summarizes the Swedish culture in a way. And you have Lagom, which is actually quite a positive expression. You can say that it's, you shouldn't, as I said, do too much or too less, but Lagom, exactly what is required. But then you have the downside of Lagom, which is the Swedish Jantelagen, which basically means that you should not think that you are more than anyone else, basically. You should not stand out. So that's kind of the downside of everything being Lagom, because I mean, in the Swedish culture, at least in the traditional Swedish culture, even if that's also changing rapidly, I think, in the world of globalization, the Jantelagen is not so positive, where you really then should not believe that you are anything special, everyone should be the same. And I mean, that is also coming from the fact that Sweden is a country of great equality. We don't have a lot of difference in the society. You have a lot of equality between gender, but also between classes, etc. And you really can't talk much about, lower classes, upper classes. Everything is fairly Lagom, in that sense.
India is a little bit hierarchical by nature. So do you experience some challenge there?
Yeah, I think that, of course, hierarchy, too much of hierarchy is not a good thing, but too much of no hierarchy is not a good thing either. And I can appreciate actually the Indian culture where at least you know who is the manager or you know who is the leader of a team. Sometimes when you enter a Swedish conference room for a meeting or whatever, it's quite difficult to know who is actually leading this meeting because everyone is so equal, right? So I think that hierarchy can, if implemented in the right way, bring clarity and bring direction. But it can, of course, also mean that people feel less empowered. It can bring a lot of, power struggles and etc. Right? So I think that again, it's somewhere where you have to be somewhere in between, right? to use hierarchy and hierarchical structures to really bring something positive for your team. Right? And then I think that's also one of the challenges sometimes that Swedes have in India, that they are used to having perhaps teams that are very self-propelled and self-motivated and self-organized, etc. Right? Whereas Indian colleagues, to a great extent, still, even if that's changing a lot as well, I mean, still requires quite a lot of direction and in a very clear way, you know, do this, don't do this, deliver this at this time, talk to that person, do etc. etc. Right? And I think that that is one of the biggest challenges I think that Swedish leaders have, you know, coming to India, not understanding that their leadership also needs to be adapted to the culture where it is, you know, where you actually lead in, right?
We talk about feedback culture. How was your experience?
I think the Swedish feedback culture is extremely indirect. I mean, you will never get concrete feedback if it is, so to say, constructive / negative feedback. We are very good in Sweden in giving positive feedback. Yeah, that's great, that's fantastic. But to give negative feedback, to be challenging in your feedback, is something, in my experience, at least Swedes really struggle with. So I think that in India, I don't agree. I think that India, from that sense, is not an Asian country. I think that the feedback culture here is very direct. I have seen colleagues that have been completely stripped down by their managers, you know, and not in a very pleasant way, you know. So again, I think that the challenge is here to take the good practices when it comes to delivering positive feedback from perhaps Western Europe and Sweden, but also be a little more concrete in how you actually deal with conflict, how you deal with non-performance, and how you deliver challenging feedback, which I actually think that some of my Indian colleagues are much more well-versed with than I am. But if we compare, for example, the Danish work culture and the Swedish work culture, they are very different as well, right? Whereas where Danish people find Swedes very cumbersome and very slow and very, you know, hesitant about giving feedback and, you know, etc. Right? So I don't think there is only differences between, you know, India in this case and Sweden, but also very much within the European countries.
You know? That's true. Also, good that you mentioned Denmark. In the Danish, they are really sarcastic, you know. Is it the same in Sweden?
I guess that Sweden is, in that sense, now Denmark is a quite small country, but even so has a quite diverse culture from city to city, and I think the same applies in Sweden. You know, that typically the humor and the sense of sarcasm differs a lot between the different ends of the country. But I would say that Swedes have a good sense of humor. People are humorous people once you get to know them, perhaps not so easy to get close to at start, and definitely have a sense of sarcasm. And I think that especially my hometown, Gothenburg, we have had a lot of influence from England. We used to have a lot of, you know, direct shipping lines and boat lines to England, and therefore have been quite influenced by the English humor, which in itself is quite sarcastic and ironic, etc. Right? So I think that at least we on the West Coast see ourselves as very refined in our humor and how we work with sarcasm and irony. When we come to Denmark, we see that as very like continental and very European and very like loose, you know. Still in Sweden, we all believe that the Danish people have a gammeldansk schnapps in the morning and that they all smoke cigars and stuff like that, you know. So I think our view of Danish people is that they are very easygoing people. So.
Another concept is the Fika, right? The coffee breaks. So how important is Fika in Swedish culture, especially at workplace?
It's quite important, and in most workplaces you will have these Fika breaks where you then you can have either on Fridays in the afternoon when someone then has baked according to a baking schedule that you have in the team or the department and brings that to the team, and then you discuss and you talk, and then it's like no work talk. It's basically holiday or sports or TV or whatever it can be. Yeah, so quite important concept for team building, I would say.
Okay, so it's happening on once in a week? Or?
The origins of Fika is the Friday Fika, but Fika can happen at any point in time. And the coffee culture is quite big in Sweden. You have a lot of cafes and you have a lot of, a lot of things centered around the whole coffee experience, kind of.
What are some of the communication challenges that you experience in the workplace in India compared to Sweden?
Yeah, perhaps I would say that, I don't know if it's communication, but it's more of indirect communication, right? Certain words that you use in Swedish or certain expressions that you use, they have different kind of cultural connotations, right?
Yeah.
Which is perhaps not at all shared with the colleagues here in India. And if you say, Swedes express, for example, displeasure in a very non-obvious way, right? And you can hardly see on the face of a Swede if the person is happy or angry or sad, etc. So I think that the indirect communication can definitely be a challenge, since we come from very different kind of, cultures of communication,
So how you overcome that challenge?
In Volvo, we work a lot with our company culture, where we try to embrace all the different, country cultures that we work within. We work with country culture sensitization workshops, where we introduce our colleagues to the different aspects of culture for a particular country, the typical pitfalls, and we have some examples on various expressions, etc. Right, and I think that works very well for us, But I think it's also important that even if we are Swedes or Indians or from America, whatever, we still work for the same company, and we have a company culture that is very important to us and very strong.
Is there any interesting experience or instance that you can recollect, or some funny experience you would like to share?
I can share the first night when I came to Bangalore when I moved here in 2006. I came to the airport and I landed in Bangalore then. I wasn't really, I had visited before, of course, etc. But I didn't know really what to expect, right? So I came to a flat that had been allocated to me, and in the flat, I suddenly realized at 3 a.m. that there were like 2 people sleeping in various places in the flat on the floor. And then I understood later that one was a cook or a maid and one was a caretaker. And that was a big, kind of strange thing for me, right? That you had suddenly people sleeping in your house. And I asked, but why? Yeah, but if you want some like milk in the night or something, but I can make my own milk, So that I think was quite a big of a, not shock per se, but it was something that was very different, But then you also need to understand in what context that happens, right? That in India, you don't have the possibility for everyone to be engineers or lawyers or doctors, etc., right? And we don't have it all the same prerequisites in India as, for example, in Sweden. So all these professions that perhaps have been abolished in Western Europe and sometimes even are frowned upon, like maid, driver, cleaner, sweeper, etc., they still exist here for very good reasons. And I think that it's really, I don't think it's really fair to see that those are professions that shouldn't exist, because in the Indian context where India is today, we need people with these professions in order to not have a lot of, for example, beggars or poverty, etc. Right? And I think it's rather up to us then, who are more perhaps benefited in that sense, to really make sure that we treat these people with the respect that they deserve, right?
Yeah. What is your advice to expats coming to India?
I think that India is a very easy country to live in, very easy to get contact with people. People are open, friendly, helpful, etc. Which is, again, something is very different from Sweden. because when the workday ends at 4:30 in Sweden, then you go home and then you don't see each other kind of. Whereas here, I mean, it's often sometimes, you know, you get invited when you fall sick. You always have colleagues coming, visiting, preparing food, etc., etc. So I think that Indian people are very easy to get contact with and it's easy to become a part of the Indian society, I would say, if you show a little bit of interest, if you show a little bit of humility, if you accept differences and you embrace, you know, differences. I think it's important to embrace India for what India is. Yeah. Don't compare India to France or US or Sweden or whatever, right? Don't say, oh, it's so dirty, or there are so many poor people, or the food is so spicy. Yes, that might be so, you know, but we as expats expats coming here, I think also enjoy some of the privileges here in India that they would never be able to enjoy in their home country. And I think that if you really want the most of your Indian experience, immerse yourself in the society, break out of the expat circle. I mean, you didn't come here to India to just spend time with other Europeans. Then I think that the whole purpose is lost, right? Be an ambassador for your own country, but when you leave India, make sure that you can be an ambassador for India.
Excellent. Great session. Thanks a lot, Jonas. It was short, but really interesting points.
My pleasure.
A lot of interesting stuff. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Maybe we'll catch up again later for some future short sessions. Thank you.
I'm sure we will.